Hello, product people. What amazing space in my hometown, my hometown of Amsterdam. Super excited to see you guys and share some content around GenAI and what we're up to at Booking. So about a year and a half ago, I remember very clearly in November, I think it was November 12th, November 10th, maybe not that clearly, OpenAI launched the ChatGPT and got the whole world excited, even non-tech people, about the power of generative AI and what it can do for us in our personal life, in our professional life. Up until that time, it was a much smaller set of people that were excited about AI. That included me, because I've been working on AI for about 20 years on various aspects, building search engines, building user interfaces for search at large companies like Microsoft, working on e-commerce scenarios at eBay, working on all the various mobile scenarios as well. So I'm going to talk a lot about AI today. I just wanted to maybe spend a couple minutes to introduce myself. I was born in the US, but I was raised in Europe. Grew up in Hungary and Austria, moved to Canada. That's where I did all my schooling, started my career, passed university, and then moved back to Europe about 5 years ago to Germany, and I've been living in Amsterdam for about 3.5 years. I started my career as a developer, software developer, and then moved over to product a little bit over 20 years ago. Last line of code I was able to commercially write was around 2002, when products still shipped on CDs, believe it or not. Not sure how many of you remember that. But then since in the 15 years at Microsoft, I had the chance to work on large-scale search engines, advertising scenarios. I was the first person hired in mobile search, which was pretty amazing. That was a couple years before the iPhone, so I've gone through that disruption as well. And I'm super excited about the disruption that's happening right now, and thankful that my career still has some years left in order to enjoy that. I joined Booking about a year and a half ago, mainly because I love two-sided marketplace, which I learned at eBay, where I was senior director of shipping, which we also used AI for many, many great things, powering user experiences, delivering scenarios for our customers. But I love Booking because it's all about making travelers' lives easier, and I think with the power of GenAI, we can do so much more with that. I'll share a little bit of Booking by numbers. We're a fairly large company. We're actually just down about 5 minutes away from here, head office. I'm not going to get into the details of these numbers, but I could say a couple of things that while I'm going to talk to you in the next 30 minutes or so, we'll have tens of thousands of people booking their dream vacation. So while these numbers are very huge, it's always good to kind of ground yourself in the real customer scenarios. Those tens of thousands of people are dreaming about their vacations, whether it's a business trip, vacation with their partners, vacation with their kids. We need to make sure that we have user empathy in everything we do, even though we're large scale. So I want to do a little bit of grounding. Some of you might have heard or seen this before on how to think about GenAI. And this is an example that we were using early on at Booking around an example of building, let's say, an AI chef or a chef type of app. And I'll kind of go through what it feels like as a real human or as a AI-generated chef. So if you wanted to become a chef these days, there's many ways to do that. Probably one of the more popular ones is if you go and enter a culinary school. So what do you do at the culinary school? You start following recipes, you start creating dishes. Over time, you start making more advanced dishes, you start playing with the ingredients, you get feedback from people tasting your food, and you start adjusting, right? All the recipes that you're creating. You get to learn, you get to make your own niche, and over time, you actually start creating recipes based on your favorite ingredients, the ingredients that kind of speak to you, and hopefully you become a world-class chef. Now let's look at how this would be done with the GenAI chef and the pros and cons around that. So imagine now this GenAI chef that we have is able to look at every recipe ever created in human life that's been recorded and found on the internet, whether that's text, whether that's videos, whether that's cookbooks. It's able to take all of this stuff in, able to kind of learn the outcomes of these recipes and how they tasted. And over time, it will actually start creating these recipes that you might have never heard of. Very similar to the chef example. Now, the first got you with the GenAI chef is it could actually start creating recipes based on ingredients that don't exist. That could be a problem, right? It could start creating recipes with tools that don't even exist. We call that hallucination, and that's something that you need to be really, really mindful, even though you have the power of this GenAI being able to create all this great stuff. So what does this mean to you? What does this mean to booking? I watched a video a few months back by Henry Nieberg. I recommend you watch it. And he calls this kind of like the Einstein in your basement. So kind of like how I talked about the chef. Imagine that you can have this Einstein in the basement that could take on any role. So it could have access to all the human knowledge that's ever been recorded, that's publicly available. Again, it's written stuff, could be vlogs, videos, books, and so on. And it could take on any persona that you require. So it could become a doctor in the future, it could become a lawyer, it could be an accountant, a coach, a poet. But for booking, what we're looking at is become a concierge or a travel agent, a travel advisor. So imagine having in the back of your pocket or in your basement the travel agent that knows everything about every destination, has the ins and outs, like a concierge at a high-end hotel. You know, when you go there and you ask him, what do you recommend? What restaurant do you recommend? How do I get to your hotel? What are the ins and outs of this area? What are the cool places to go to? Kind of hard to find today, but it's something that a concierge would know. So our dream is to have this content all within booking. Now, I mentioned a little bit about hallucination. I'll talk a little bit about how we dealt with that. But the key to ground this with today's technology is using appropriate prompting. So imagine the super smart person. Sometimes it's very eager to answer. It'll never say it doesn't know the answer. So it's kind of like a child. So you need to be very careful of how you instruct it, how you tell it to what kind of answers you want, especially when you're scaling this out to the public. Maybe there's some discussions that are off topic. So we had to make sure that we only answer travel-related things, even though our Einstein in the basement would be super happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about. Super important. So let's get into the main topic of discussion around personalization. Like I mentioned, I've been around a lot. At one time, I started a group at Microsoft roughly 20 years ago. It was called User-Centric Advertising. And I really wish we had the tools that we have today, because what we were trying to figure out is how do we marry content, very personalized content, and understanding the needs of customers. I believe GenAI could actually help with us significantly now. So the three things that I'm most excited about, there's a bunch more, is really understanding user intent. And I'll ground this with an example. A few years ago, when my children were much smaller, whenever I went to go on a holiday or stay at a hotel, I was always looking for a child-friendly pool. Something that's actually pretty hard to find even these days unless you start using some generative AI. You had to go and maybe do some searches on Google or go to an OTA like Booking. You have to kind of go through the description, maybe look at some images, maybe there's some UGC. You could see some children playing by the pool and going, that place has a child-friendly pool. Next one is around personalization, super important, is to create content that feels to that person, right? So enhancing and creating personalized content also is a superpower of GenAI. So now if I'm looking for a place with a child-friendly pool, when I start to see search results, I'd love that to be highlighted. So all my criteria that I have, if I want a cool breakfast bar, maybe a rooftop bar, and a child-friendly pool, when I look at the description, I'd love that to be actually highlighted so I can easily find that and know that the search was tailor-made for me. And the last, probably the most exciting part, is to be able to have this human-like interaction. So right now, most of the interaction that you've had with search engines or OTAs is kind of you put in your request, you get an answer, If you don't like what you've seen, then you start over again. There wasn't this idea of continuously doing that. Even though many companies have tried that, it just wasn't able to scale with the cost that we can do today. So let me talk a little bit about the future, but before we get to the future, let's talk about the past. And the reason I put this slide up is kind of back to what Todd was saying is GenAI technology is great. There are a lot of people just building all kinds of stuff for it. But at Booking, we really want to be grounded on real user problems. And these travelers, I think probably about 20, 25 years ago, used to visit these travel agencies. They've got the same needs today. They want to find a fairly good deal, a great deal maybe. They want to talk to experts that are reliable, that can tell them about the destination. This place looks like it was focusing on the Caribbean. They also want to have somebody that they can depend on. Imagine going to Jamaica, not knowing the language, never being there. If something goes astray, then you want to have somebody to be able to talk to. So those are the core user needs that we need to focus on and figure out how can we leverage GenAI, how can we incorporate this in order to build a much better user experience. And then the way we would do that is revisiting the customer journey. I'm sure most of you have this. This is really a simple way to look at it at Booking. We're looking at 6 different stages, all the way from discovery, planning, search and book and pay, where most of our customers actually interact with us, and then in trip management, in-trip experience, and then post-trip when they're doing their reviews. We've got a lot of research on travelers over the years. And another interesting thing that I found we had when I joined a year and a half ago, we even monitor how the travelers are feeling through this journey. Now, being only here a year and a half ago, I thought it was only really me that got excited when we were doing that discovery and planning. But it turns out that a lot of you also find this really exciting, unfortunately or fortunately, almost as exciting as going on the trip. Now, what's interesting as well is there's a little bit of a lull around trip management, and this is probably due to the fact that when you're ready to take your trip, the last few days, you're doing your travel confirmations, you're ensuring you have a ride to the airport, you're double checking everything, and sometimes if you didn't plan very well, you have to make some adjustments, which could be very painful. So we think there's a huge opportunity to raise the bar in that area as well. We also named these just so we can have much better empathy for our users, whether they're dreaming, discovering, or deciding, designing, and then enjoying and depending the trip. So what does this really mean? Let me talk about the art of possible meets the needs of the traveler. So I already mentioned that the 3 things that I'm excited about at the top level are really understanding user intent, be able to have this human-like interaction back and forth, a continuous discussion, which has been super hard to do that up until now. And then also the ability to actually create personalized content, whether it's from content that you already have or content that you're creating, maybe even from external sources. The idea here is, while all these 3 things are super important and they could stand on their own, you really can create a magical user interface if you pull these things together working in unison. And that's what we're trying to do. Let me talk a little bit more about trip intent. So based on our research, this is kind of like the white text are saying, looking for cheap places to go for a week this summer that's beachy with a direct flight. If you try to kind of decipher all the things that are in there, you know that it's pretty hard to do that. If you actually type this into Google today, which I tried yesterday, you will get a set of blue links, and I think the number 1 or number 2 result was a curated document with 23 beach recommendations. So that's as good as it gets today. It did not really help me with what is cheap, and cheap may mean one thing for you, especially depending on what the travel intent is. Cheap is different when you're looking for a short weekend getaway versus an anniversary trip that you've been planning for the past few years. So the idea is that we will build a system that can understand this, iterate, and understand every specific part. It will be carried through the whole user journey and get specific when need to be, but step back and be broad whenever it needs to be. The next part is user context. So this is pretty well everything we know about you from what you've done with us in the past. I spent 6 years, about 8 years on e-commerce prior to joining Booking, and I didn't realize how much easier it was to do this within e-commerce. Because over time, so if you shop things on BOL or on Amazon, the system gets to learn what you're doing. Now with travel, you take on a persona almost every time you book a trip. So if we have, let's say, a Genius 3 member who books quite a lot with us, you may have booked 5 trips with us, maybe 8 trips with us. 3 might have been business trips, where you just want to get in, get out. You were worried about the location, maybe close to where you were going to. If you traveled with your family and then traveled with buddies, we actually wouldn't know how to kind of generalize you because you're acting as different persons every time. So this just shows you that the power of really understanding the intent and having that conversational way to really look into what you're looking for is super important. The last thing that we're also pretty excited about, Todd mentioned the Klarna case study. I think the CS area is a whole gold mine, not only to save on the bottom line, so we can automate a bunch of stuff, but I also think that it could deliver a great user experience, drive up that dependability. So here's a situation where a Jennifer had a little bit of a trip disruption. She showed up at the hotel, and they didn't have the specific room that she was looking for. Now, when she gets sent over to the CS agent, we could find out all the information we know about her, about the information that she shared with us, her trip intent, in order to better serve her. This is pretty hard right now, typical on CS systems. I know at Booking, we integrate to hundreds of backend systems in order for the CS to have a single desktop agent. So we believe GenAI could actually do this much better and bring that content together. But that's not the part that I'm most excited about. What I'm excited about is, remember we talked about how customers are feeling, what they're doing. So we can actually have like a GenAI agent watch this discussion, right? Whether it's on voice or on text or on email, and then really understand how this person is feeling. Have we resolved their issues in a timely manner that made them happy? And the reason I'm excited about understanding that is because if we take that knowledge into subsequent visits from her, we can figure out did we create a trust deficit? Is there something that we have to do to make it right in order for her to behave and engage with us the way we would like to engage with a good customer? Or did she gain trust? Does that mean that we could be more forward in making extra recommendations in the future with her? So I think this is a super exciting area to spend some time in and investment. What I want to do now is show you a couple examples. So we were one of the first set of folks that launched something for a large-scale company. We've been live with our AI trip planner almost actually a little bit over a year now. It's live in the US, English-speaking countries, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and in UK. We're working hard to actually bring it into Netherlands as well, but if you want to know a little trick, if you VPN into UK, the feature will show up in your app right here in the Dutch version. So let me run this right now. Thanks. So I could probably spend hours telling you all the things we learned. I was pretty well hands-on on this project. This was my first big project at Booking since I joined. I actually read thousands of these discussions. One thing that I still keep telling people is it's amazing how people actually believe they're talking to humans. Many people say pleases and thank yous and things like that. So they never do that for our regular system. So a couple of things that we did, well, we don't know actually in the feedback. A couple of things that I want to make sure when we launch this is I didn't want to just build like a ChatGPT-like thing which sits on the side. I want to make sure that it's integrated into the rest of the app. And you've seen that we've had that carousel with images. Text is great, but a photo is worth 1,000 words, right? You can go back and forth seamlessly with our current mobile interface. A couple learnings. It was very scary at the beginning because the hallucination was out of control, starting to recommend things that didn't exist or telling you to go to places where they were not open and things like that. So we've actually internally built our own little orchestrator. So we have our own AI models for all the content that we are sure of. So prices, availabilities, and things like that are not coming from an LLM. That's coming internally from us. But the actual discussion and watching the discussion, understanding when things are going sideways, we use a number of different kinds of LLMs with our orchestrator. We've got tons of learning from here. We now have a backlog of over 100 scenarios that we're starting to work on. We're integrating GenAI into the rest of it. I want to show you one example, which we are just starting to roll out to a small percentage of people, and we'll see how this works. So this is basically, from all the learnings we had in AITP, we're moving over to enhancing our search. So again, very grounded in real user problems, allowing for natural language. I could see the progression over time that we'll actually include this in our search box and get rid of the search box as we know it today, replace it with something that's natural and iterative. A lot of A/B testing and so on. So a couple of things to highlight here that I'm excited about. It wasn't shown in a demo, but we've got proof of concepts internally. The content, so we're a two-sided marketplace, so all the content we get from our partners, properties. And we're actually starting to even use generative AI to decipher what's on that image. So imagine if you're a tourist coming from the US to lovely Amsterdam, you may be looking for a hotel with a view of a canal, right? You may be looking for a hotel with a view of a windmill. And the interesting thing is you probably don't want the electrical windmills, you probably want the old classic style windmills, right? So these are all things that you have to think about as you're looking at that content. And then hopefully in the future we'll take all that content and build it into a search engine so we can easily find those things. So my scenario that I started with, looking for a kids-friendly pool, it's just really the baby steps. We think there's so much power in the future of bringing GenAI into this. I also want to talk a little about, back to, again, as funny, I was listening to Todd's keynote at the beginning. I've been around for a while, and I want to kind of take you through my learnings of the past. Does anybody know what this represents, or only the people my age? Did you use this? He used it. All right. So back in the late 80s, early 90s, this was probably the most amazing consumer-facing app out there. We were able to write documents, right, instead of using a typewriter. Remember, we actually used to have little stickies that we would put on a keyboard because this app was really hard to learn. It was easy to use. Once you learned it, you learned all the shortcuts. You had to learn something else, and I'm glad I had a computer science background because I think you needed it. This was a feature in WordPerfect called Reveal Codes, because we were in character-based mode, so you actually couldn't see what the character looked like if you tried to make it bold or underline or change the color, make it italic. You had to look at it like the way you typed it, and then you had to go into this Reveal Codes, which I think was probably the most loved, maybe hated, well, loved and hated feature, but it's definitely a core thing that WordPerfect brought to the table, which is, I think, why they were so successful. Now, let's go through from the character-based revolution into the graphical-based. And here's WordPerfect running in Windows 3.1 or so. What you see is you can actually now make things bold on the top or make things italic. But this company seemed like they didn't know how to get rid of what was their strength, the reveal code. So you can go do that there as well. I actually started using this and gave up and moved to another product called AmiPro pretty quickly because those things were not working synchronized. So here's a company that looked at their strength and in this transition turned it into a liability, right? So question to you is, what do you have any of that? Are you aware of that? Don't take your strength and turn it into liability. And then as we move forward, Copilot is a term that Microsoft uses. I think it's a pretty good one. Some people are calling it co-intelligence. But this idea of how do you inject this GenAI into your current scenarios. So the companies, I think, that will survive in the future, that will thrive in the future, will figure out how to do this. We don't have the recipe, so you have to try many, many things, just like I was trying a booking where we created a whole new separate flow to get the same task done, but we allowed you to get back to the funnel. We're now trying out things with search filters. Eventually, we'll try with search as well. You probably need to think about how do you do that? How do you move into this new world with your product? And I think the paradigm is flipping. So like I mentioned, I was there with character-based computing, with graphical. I was at the early stage of mobile. And I think this disruption is pretty amazing, especially when it comes to user experiences. Because back to the WordPerfect scenario, the product managers, I don't think they actually had product managers back then in that day, but whoever were the designers, what we were trying to do is we were trying to teach the users on how to use the system that we built to accomplish the task that we think you need to accomplish with our app. I think in the future that's changing. I think we need to give up on that because those things are just years and years of evolvement. Nobody 50 years ago would have known what a search box is, what a filter is, or things like that. We built those over the years. What people are naturally want to do is communicate to you in their own natural language. So the systems we need to build tomorrow need to understand what the user wants to do versus us teaching them and adopting and doing A/B tests on the fine-tuning of how we do filters, what filters we show on top versus on the bottom. Does this resonate with anybody? Yeah? All right, cool. So these are the guiding principles we use internally. I think it's a great idea to put it down on paper so everybody understands. I'm not going to get into the details for lack of time, but what I want to focus on is never undermine trust. So trust is huge with your users, especially you're changing things on them, right? Customers don't like change. So make sure you're always focusing on that, focusing on real user problems, especially if you're extending what you're offering like we are. Make sure you don't overwhelm them with new features, earn the trust. let them go along. So a lot of people talk about like task completion with AI agents that'll just do everything for you. I believe maybe that's great for the advanced users, or maybe 3-5 years down the road. Take the users right now, show them recommendations, earn that trust, so then you can actually go and maybe complete a transaction for them. Next one is some mistakes to avoid. I think there's a much longer list, but these are the ones that really resonating with me. And we mentioned, don't just chase the GenAI fad unless you're doing it for learning. So there's also value in just trying stuff, because you will learn a lot. What we've learned in a year is amazing. If we wouldn't have invested for the last 12 months. Ground the user needs. Don't chase today's tech shortcomings. I'm paraphrasing Sam Altman here, who's the CEO of OpenAI. He continually makes a point that the way you should think about GenAI, so not just the Einstein thing, is it's going to get much better. And whatever your design you're building, you should always think about that if it becomes much better, is what I'm building still relevant? So there is a lot of people that are working on the shortcomings right now. As GenAI gets better, they may find their feature useless overnight. Premature scaling, I talked to you about when we were in test. We were in test for a very long time. A couple of things I want to make sure is around hallucination. The discussion, is this on brand? Every company has a brand, like Amazon has a brand, Instagram has a brand, Booking, we have our own brand. We want to make sure that the discussions are on brand. We want to make sure that we didn't talk about things we didn't feel like we want to talk about, so focusing on travel. And the challenge there is if you start restricting the LLM, all of a sudden it doesn't want to do anything. So there's a fine balance of how much prompting you give it, so it stays within constraints. We also had challenges around performance. That one is not as bad anymore. All the LLMs are performing much better now. And then lastly, the laws and regulations. We're a global company, so this is a whole new world of complexity of figuring out where you can launch stuff. If you're only in Europe, that's probably much easier. And it's part of the reasons that we tried out in the US at first. English speaking, it was just the easiest way to get there. So learnings and takeaway. I hope you like the idea of Einstein in your basement. Maybe go back, think about what is that Einstein for your company. Maybe there's multiple. How can you communicate to this Einstein to get the best? Revisit unmet needs, validate extended scope. Like I mentioned, we've now our user journey is a little bit longer than we've been used to. Make sure that users are actually thinking it's a service that you've earned the right to offer to them. They're just one click away from another app on their phone. Earn trust, so trust, eventually. And then last is, we're just learning, embrace AI. You will learn so much. The whole world in the last 4 or 5 weeks has been crazy advancement. But I think you're starting to see that people are actually announcing things 6 or 9 months out. So just get going. I want to leave you with something. This is a disruption from another era. I'm not sure if you've heard this quote. I'm going to paraphrase it, that we usually underestimate the long-term effect. So when I started doing mobile 20 years ago or so, I kept telling people that I think people will buy clothes on a mobile device. And I've had so many people tell me, oh, there's no way I will ever buy anything. People are buying houses, cars, everything on there, right? So it definitely was. In this specific image, what I thought was interesting, when cars were coming around, the biggest challenge in cars. So they didn't worry about the things that we need to worry about today, is like pollution, speed, making sure that the driver has a license and things like that. And I believe that with AI, we're kind of a little bit on that. A year ago, the things that people were worried about is a little bit different now. So just keep an open mind and try things. Thanks for listening.